Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my Exploring Personality series, now episode 4, for those of you who are actually sticking around. Thank you very much. My name is Joseph. I am the host of this series, and I'm here with one of my friends from college, Charles, who is an INFP, a fellow idealist, and an Enneagram 5, and what I've come to understand as a moving away pattern. So, Charles, thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe what you like to do, what you don't like to do, things you're good at, things you're not so good at. Let's try to get to know you better.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
So I'm Charles. Currently I am living in Mobile, Alabama, working as a video producer and video editor for a company here. I've been doing that for a little over a year. What do I like and what do I dislike? Oh man.
Yeah, that's a good question, right?
How am I supposed to know?
Hmm.
It's I like my career. I would say I'm a pretty career-driven person.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I find a lot of meaning in doing something that actually kind of not just doing something for a job, but doing something that I have some kind of connection to, or that means something to me. Um, I'm so bad about talking about
You did.
myself.
Thanks for
This is
trying. This
like
is
a
exciting.
yeah,
No.
yeah.
Well, let me help you. Yeah. So something that you have a connection to, something meaningful to you. So what is it about your work now that is meaningful? And maybe juxtapose that with, we were talking earlier about your experience selling insurance right out of college.
Yes,
What was the
yes.
feeling? I mean, there's different feelings there, right? I'm wondering.
Yeah. I'm a little scared because I don't know who's watching this, but I don't
That's
want to talk
funny.
too much trash about my old job. But it just wasn't as for my personality and the things that really like kind of make me come alive.
Hmm.
I wasn't super passionate about the insurance industry. I don't know if anyone is. It's pretty dull from that point of view. But even things like having like a creative outlet, having some sort of expression. I mean, we kind of had to do things. You had a product. That product was kind of the same the whole way, and you just kind of
Hmm.
had to find people that it was a good fit for. And now comparing that to what I do now, there's a lot less routine. It's every day looks a little different. We're sometimes filming an advertisement on site for something, or maybe we're filming something inside here at the studio. Um, and then there's editing days when you have to put it all together. You spent 2 or 3 days shooting something, and then you have to sit in front of the computer and make sense of it, make sense of all the stuff you shot, and kind of tell a story with all the pieces that you gathered. So it's challenging. It's dynamic. It's always changing, always something new. And I get to put a little bit of myself into the final product, which is very cool.
See, that
Uh,
that interests me a lot.
yeah, and that was something that was very different from something like insurance. Like there is no
Well,
Charles in that product at all.
help me understand, but this is probably an abstract question, but I'm curious. You said put a little of yourself in the project. What does that even look like? Is that just sort of a vague thing? It just expresses itself. It's very mysterious, or what do you mean?
You know, it's hard to put a finger on it, but I think in this field, you're when you have a camera in your hand, there's a lot of different ways to approach filming something. And I've grown up watching YouTube videos. I'm all self-taught. Like I just kind of learned how to do this stuff by again watching YouTube videos and practicing and playing with my mom's camera that I found in her closet. So when I put my idea for video, like I can think of what it's going to look like in my head way before I start shooting, and I see it, and it's about
Mhm.
getting that out of my head into get the camera to make that work. So that's very different from the way someone else who maybe had a
Ah,
different
I see.
had a different maybe like learning in a classroom, or
Yeah.
maybe had different influences growing up, likes different kinds of movies, and then gravitates towards more, maybe it's like more energetic, more handheld motion, a lot more like
Hmm.
you can have like an aggressive editing style, or like a much more calm, serene.
How interesting.
There's infinite possibilities as to what a video looks like and the pieces that make it up. So
have you found your style, or are you kind of a connoisseur, like you're a master of all, or
I'm trying to
you're
find my
exploring?
style.
You're exploring.
I'm trying to find my style. I'm pretty new, to
Mm,
doing this in a real professional setting. So
exciting.
I'm still in the like learn as much as possible phase, but I gravitate towards some things and away from different things. And I think there are certain things that I would characterize as more of my style. I just like a lot of smooth motion and trying
Smooth
to,
motion.
like, composition wise, that's something that I'm trying to focus more on, is telling a story with just what is in the frame. So like visual storytelling, I'm trying to get better at that versus just
Interesting.
waving a camera in front of something and hoping it looks good.
So maybe telling a story just with the actual images.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good way to describe it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So there's a sort of an interest in storytelling, an innate interest.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not very good at storytelling. I would say I'm much more better at, like, again,
Do you
if
like
someone said,
story?
"Write the camera
Are you
this way."
drawn to stories? Are you drawn to movies and films? And
Oh yeah, I love movies. I love I mean, I probably watch like 1 or 2 movies a week.
there you go. Yeah.
Just because there's so much, looking at it from just pure entertainment, but now coming from my perspective of kind of having the capabilities to make something similar, I see things in a whole new light, and it's really interesting to
It
watch.
reminds me so much of when you specialize, you actually start to see things that people just normally don't.
Yeah,
Like, for example, you're a psychotherapist and you're working with patients all day, every day, and you're like really getting into like these sensitive patterns. And you go out into the public world and you can see all these things.
yeah,
But I'm sure it's similar with art. I can tell you there's research on musicians specifically, their auditory cortex is actually completely differently sort of lined up in the brain. They've got this super sensitivity because they've grown up, like literally when their brain was maturing, they were hearing different pitches, different
wow.
sounds, and learning to be sensitive to those things, and the
Huh.
practicing and repeating, and so it's amazing to
Yeah,
consider.
that's so fascinating. That is
Yeah.
another thing I would say I have a genuine interest in, is psychology and modern kind of figuring out how the brain works in different areas and people. And I think that's something that the world hasn't been able to do until very recently, is map out these things, like come up with a science of how the brain works. I mean,
It's
go back
interesting
even 40 years.
you bring that up. I'm curious. So, do you have an interest maybe also in science?
Maybe applied science.
Okay. So, like
I see it
practically.
as a means. I see it as a means to, one, better understand myself, and two, better understand others, I think.
So yeah, more clinically driven then. I'm very
Yeah,
interested in the human experience, but understanding it scientifically.
right.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, fun. What was one of your favorite classes, probably in college? I'm wondering what you enjoyed the most.
Favorite classes in college.
Yeah, you could pick one or two, or
Probably church and state, which
oh,
was a poli-sci class
poli
with
sci.
Father Matthew Baugh,
Oh,
who
of
is
course.
the most brilliant guy I've ever
Yeah, I
met.
totally understand that.
Yeah,
He
I could
was.
listen to him read the dictionary and just walk away feeling great.
We were spoiled rotten with him. That's for sure.
I know.
Holy cow. Yeah, it's wonderful. For those who aren't familiar with him, he's a Jesuit priest, but he was a scholastic professor, I think, of political science at Spring Hill College when we were there,
Mhm.
and a lawyer, but also a PhD in political philosophy. So very well educated man and very sensitive, compassionate person. So let's do this. So I've had some fundamental questions. I'm sure you listened to this in the other videos, but I'm curious to know if you really do relate deeply. One of the main things I'm interested in is perhaps a sense of your own sensitivity. Have you felt maybe you were maybe more sensitive than other people, maybe too sensitive? And understanding what that means more as like an internal sensitivity. Have you felt that in life? Maybe experiences growing up of actually being overwhelmed, like overly stimulated,
Mhm.
and needing to maybe withdraw or pull away. Any experiences like that? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think growing up, when I was very young, my
Mhm.
parents would always joke that I was like very sensitive, like I
Okay.
was always apologizing for things that like may or may not have been my fault. Um, but yeah, I think I was definitely like a sensitive kid growing up. And as I got older, I tried to like I don't know if move away from that is the right term, or like try to master it, because
For sure.
as a kid growing up, you when you realize like, oh shoot, I can be put in a vulnerable state like that, you start to see danger, and as you grow up in middle and high school, you start to create kind of like defense mechanisms, or like a create situations where you're not going to be put in vulnerable situations like that. But yeah, I do think I do have a sensitive side. I'm definitely very conscientious of other people more so than myself, I think. Um, and I think that's probably where most of my thought and most of my brain power is spent operating. If I just am left to my own devices, is kind of thinking about other people, what's expected of me by those people,
Mhm.
how do I kind of fit in and add value to other people, more so than myself. I think I don't think of
Interesting.
myself
Interesting.
as much as I do like myself in relation to
I see.
whatever my kind of societal situation is.
So a curious question would be, just sort of socially. Now we're thinking about the social experience. When you've been in different social situations, probably the best examples are intimate relationships, obviously. When we're really vulnerable, we really get to know ourselves. Uh, and but even in groups and things, I'm wondering if you felt, in relation to belonging in a group or an organization, maybe sort of like a sense of maybe just not really being in it, maybe being on the outside looking in, never really feeling like you were really a part of the group or institution or anything. Have you had any experiences like that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a good way to put it. I think definitely feel like not an outsider. Well, maybe an outsider.
Explore
I'm
it. Explore it. Yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. I definitely feel like my own head and like my own thoughts are different from most people,
Mhm.
and a lot of my like efforts socially are to try to integrate that into whatever the societal situation is. So if it's in school or whatever, if it's in college or if it's in the workplace, you know, finding a good medium of my own kind of wacky thoughts that are happening at the time, and then
Mhm.
like what is applicable currently that isn't gonna,
Yeah,
you
interesting.
freak everybody out. Because
So
I
there's
do.
there's a sense of maybe the real me would freak people out.
Yeah, yeah, kind
Yeah.
of.
Right, right. How interesting. Yeah, and sort of studying uh, the structure itself. It's really fascinating because that's kind of the conflict that always comes up. It's like, how do I really relate to people? Like really?
Hmm.
Like how do I actually like attach to people really? Because there's a sense of sort of being on the outside, the periphery, and kind of depending on how things are going emotionally, probably, and
Yeah.
upbringing and stuff. That can be a very, very difficult thing, but it's a great gift. This is what excites me about working with people psychotherapeutically, uh, who are more similar in this way, because they're typically they're sort of minimizing the need for others, right? But it's kind of a paradox. They actually really want to be sort of appreciated for maybe how weird they are, maybe how
Yes.
gifted they are, maybe they're in your case, maybe your unique brand of video production.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of making me connect some dots.
Mhm.
And again, I'm a pretty like I think I would characterize myself as like pretty emotionally like unaware. Like I'm not super in tune with my
Okay, okay.
emotional side of life. I'm trying to be, but this is like very much a recent focus that I've been trying to figure out.
You're doing
But
great.
yeah, thank you. But I do think that what you just said was really true. Like, I have kind of structured a life where there is kind of like not much need. Like, I've kind of structured my life in such a way that people don't ask a ton of me. Like, I'm kind of usually not the one making plans or something.
Mhm.
Usually I live kind of like a self-contained life where even when people aren't interacting with me, I've still kind of got my things to do, and but at the same time, there is a very like strong desire in me to be known, to be understood, and that's kind of a little bit in conflict with how.
Yeah, for me, growing up, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm a similar structure. I'm not the same, but I'm similar, which is this sort of like, I want to go to school, but I really don't want to go to school. And then when I'm at school, I'm like, so glad I'm at school. Like growing up, that kind of experience of, I don't want to have to go on the field trip.
Yeah.
Like, please, I don't want to have to go. But then when I'm there, I'm like loving the field trip. It's that sort of like, I don't want to. And I think if you kind of get into the conflict, a lot of it is about feeling controlled, right? Like, I don't want to feel controlled in this sort of relationship, or obligated in a certain way. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Can I tell you a story that kind of, I feel
Yeah,
like
absolutely. Anything.
elucidate that feeling. So
Please.
when I first went to Spring Hill, I didn't know anyone there. That was kind of a school. There were a couple people from my high school, but no one I was super close with. And that was very much out of my comfort zone. That was very much not my normal way of operating. But I could tell that based on some kind of experiences I had in high school, when I did kind of put myself out there and radically broke my comfort zone, I came out of it feeling great. So this was like going to a school where I didn't know anyone. And like in high school, I was super quiet, super shy, like completely withdrawn. And going to some school where I didn't know anyone was kind of a way to be like, okay, well, this is like jumping into the deep end. And if you can figure it out here, you can probably figure it out anywhere. So I would just be kind of radically open with people. I would just walk up to anyone I would see and start a conversation as a way. At the time, I was like shaking because I was like so nervous.
Wow, good for you.
People reacted so positively, and like I felt great afterwards, because it's like it was like a really strong social anxiety. But then once you did the thing you're so scared of, and you didn't like burst into flames, you're like, oh, okay, maybe it wasn't that bad. It's kind of like I think they call that like exposure therapy, where you just
like good old cognitive behavioral exposure therapy. Yeah.
So I've definitely tried to better understand myself in that way, and do that, and kind of have structures in my life where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this regardless of if I want to or not. But it is a battle. It's always kind of the struggle of, am I doing too much, or am I being inauthentic versus stretching yourself positively?
So Charles, this is an exciting point in the interview, because really what I've learned is that the structure surrounds the theme of authenticity. So here I am with these people, and I don't know if I really feel authentic, or here I am working, I don't really know if I feel authentic. And it's interesting because in some sense there's this temptation in some sense to almost be obsessed with that. That can be a downfall, but obviously there's a healthy way to express oneself authentically, but then sort of wearing the social mask too.
Yeah, it's a balance. I think exactly. Like most things. And then going from college to kind of the working world is, again, you have to kind of throw out most of the rules you learned in college, because it's a bit of a it's a different game at that point.
Totally different game.
I feel like I'm just always kind of learning and trying to find ways to find that happy medium of pushing myself, but also being true to myself, even though a lot of times it feels like most of my like natures and most of my like gut instincts are just to like withdraw, don't put yourself out there, just kind of stay what's comfortable and do that. So I have to very much work against that.
Yeah. Well, I can say personally, for me, it's I just really want to be able to access my feelings, and this is what's going on. how do I do that? Like, how do I really access my feelings? Because I would prefer to do that alone. It's kind of a paradox in some sense, because we can't always do that. And obviously when things are getting out of hand, when we're lacking the relationships, we're getting into the less healthy level, maybe we feel very disconnected from our emotions, very disconnected from being authentic. Yeah, because here we are sort of in our head, which is interesting. So with this structure, we see ourselves as our head, as our sort of inner world, which is actually comparatively much less common. So there's a normal sense of being different.
Yeah, that's a super, I relate
but
to
it's
that.
Normal. How do we normalize that? Isn't that interesting?
Right.
It's a normal sense.
Yeah, I think, like you said, like most of my world is in my head. Most of my ability comes from me thinking about things and me coming up with solutions, or it's all like intellect based.
Yes.
Which is strange, because there's a lot of problems that you can't think your way out of. You can't,
It's strange.
In fact, you can think yourself into a lot of problems. And then once you start overthinking those problems, it just spirals and makes it worse.
Right.
So I've had to learn kind of how to stop thinking in certain regards, or at least shut off that analyzing part of my brain and focus more on the,
that's right.
I don't know if they call that like mindfulness or being present, but a bit more in tune with your.
It's a very, like, in my opinion, I may be biased, but it's a great defense. It's just it's an intellectual defense, and there is a world of intellect that can be appreciated and valued. And I know for me, I don't even know how to operate my life otherwise. There can be a deep wound there, interestingly. Never really being able to be seen for that, or heard for that, or expressing that maybe with somebody you're attached to emotionally, which is very interesting. So there's a lot there, and I think it's wonderful. So I like where we're going with this so far. So a question for you would be, have you ever maybe felt maybe you were being perceived by others as maybe being sort of shirking sort of social norms or conventions? Like, you're not really aware of maybe, well, you've got to put on the tie, but like, you don't really feel like it's that important.
I ever
maybe,
felt like it wasn't
like maybe at the formal occasion, you got to wear the tie, but like, you're not really like these social expectations, they're sort of whatever.
Right. I do. I'm trying to think of a specific example of
that's kind of like a rough example, the tie, but that's
yeah. It's weird, because I find myself wanting to be very like anti-establishment, which is like very kind of against the rules, but also a lot of my nature is to just kind of conform and do whatever, if I'm in a group, what the group wants to do. Or I do have a healthy disdain for kind of rules in general. Whether how that manifests can be a little different, like one time I like snuck into a music festival just to see if I could, just to break the rules a little bit. And because to me it was like, well,
I've never been to one. They always sound like a fun place, but I know there's chaos everywhere, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's super fun. I wouldn't recommend sneaking in, but
that's good.
I'm trying to think of a good example, but I'm struggling a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like it's relatable, at least somewhat. It's like, I thought about it this way. My brother always joked with me, because growing up, I never wore a belt, and I always wore like the same hoodie. And like, then I finally like started wearing a belt and like wearing different shirts. And it's like I figured it out. Like I understood, this actually like people will respond better. Like people will take maybe my inner world more seriously if I care about maybe the social rules or expectations. But like my sort of default was like, well, this is it. This is what's going on.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is really what's going on, right?
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that a lot. Yeah, because it's like that is what you're feeling. Like that is like again, I'm kind of the same way. Like I kind of have my hoodie or whatever that I just kind of like will wear every day unless it's like, unless I'm going somewhere where it requires otherwise. But even then, you're just like, this is I feel like this represents me. I feel like I don't owe it to anyone else to
Okay.
show that side. But at the same time, you don't want to like ostracize yourself by just
Right, exactly. And you'll see in the more unhealthy levels for these sort of structures, that's what they do. They can become very disconnected from what you might think of as culture or society, maybe even looking more psychotic or dissociated. It's very interesting. So it's there in us all. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Let's do this. Tell me, have you ever engaged in perhaps fantasy? Has fantasy been a safe place for you in any way? It could be video games, it could be certain books growing up or films.
Yeah, I've always video games were like a big part of my life growing up, especially. I mean, some of my best experiences in life are either playing video games with my best friend or playing video games with my brother, or that was very much a big thing that I gravitated to in school as a way of coping with some of the if the day was long, if people were mean or whatever. I knew that I could always turn on something like Legend of Zelda, and it's like
that's a classic.
Right, exactly. I mean,
oh my gosh.
And I remember talking to a friend of mine about that, and I couldn't really reconcile. Like, I felt like I had like kind of wasted my time like playing video games all those years. And they said something really interesting to me, which was like, do you feel like you are like the hero? Like, do you feel like you have a desire to be like the main character? Because I think in school, you're put in a situation where maybe you're on the outskirts, whatever, you feel like the outsider, and then you go home and you're given this kind of safe place to be this kind of heroic character that can fight.
There's like control, but then there's fantasy. It's like the ego is like satisfied.
I never know how to, again, I'm kind of new to the whole psychology world, but
sure.
I guess this is a question for you a little bit, and stop me if I'm getting off track. But
well, yeah, it's fine. I like the organic. That's what people like. Keep it real.
Yeah, I think when you talk about ego, is there such a thing as like good ego, or is ego something that we try to separate from?
It's such a fun question because everyone sort of there's a connotation of ego bad.
Yeah.
Right? Like
I hear that
that's your ego. But really traditionally in psycho sort of analytic understandings, the ego is actually the point. We're working with the ego so that we can start to build, at least traditionally, what's called ego strength or ego functioning, which is this idea, maybe the ego in your case and my case is very much sort of withdrawing, very pulled into the world of ideas and fantasy and things like that, conflict surrounding authenticity. The ego does that. But in order to sort of build a sense of control, right, we're sort of learning how to use it differently. So the ego is understood as like the part of you that's sort of able to observe, right, yourself as a self. In philosophy, a great way of understanding is like understanding free will as the ability to sort of choose or redirect our attention. That might be considered ego strength. Ego strength and ego functioning are associated with all things associated with good things in life, like self-control, conscientious behavior, and things like that. So yeah, ego isn't really the problem necessarily, but it can be. It's basically just sort of depends on how you define ego. I don't know if that helped at all, but the idea is that ego is not necessarily bad. The language surrounding ego is, are we actually becoming neurotic in a way that the ego then isn't as flexible?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because I hear so much about like ego death and people striving to kind of get rid of that, that third party looking at yourself. And I guess it was just kind of, it's probably like most things in life where there's a healthy balance.
So in psychoanalytic understanding, there's like two parts of the self and there's a conflict. And the more that there is a conflict, the more rigid, the more black and white, the more, in our case, the more we withdraw, right? And the intellect is failing. We're not able to test reality. I don't know what's real. Oh no, here I go. I'm really, really regressing now. Now I really don't know what's real. Really don't trust people. I'm regressing even further. Now I'm splitting apart. We could argue schizophrenia is sort of a good representation of this in a serious illness, but everyone can do that and not be schizophrenic if they're pushed psychologically. The personality structure breaks and you've got these like, so ego helps us to test reality.
Okay. Yeah, that's really like helpful, I guess.
What is reality? Well, we know through the ego.
It's kind of like what's relevant and salient to you, and how to kind of best, I guess, cut down on all the noise, because your brain can't focus on everything all at once. You have to kind of choose what is important and relevant, and obviously people want to do that well. People don't want to focus on the wrong things.
So you might have a preference for intellect, right? And creative work. Well, a more traditional understanding would be the more you actually are able to engage that defense socially in a safe way, emotionally, the more you can start to actually see other people clearer and appreciate differences. Because there are a lot of people who are going to be bored out of their mind with your defense for intellect, not really care about your art. And the thing is, at the end of the day, it's still what you've got to work with predominantly. But have you built enough life experience to see that they have their reality? And it's actually, there's a boundary there. Yeah, it's very interesting. So let's think here. I guess the main thing, since we're at the end, that I've been asking more specifically is, I've been listening a little bit and I've sort of heard a theme surrounding maybe, anxiety in social situations and maybe wanting to be able to socialize better, fit in, and things like that. So there are conflicts surrounding that. And I guess my question is, here you are aware of these things, you've improved in many ways, you're functioning quite well. And I imagine, enjoying your work, that's a huge part of that. So my question is, for those who are similar to you in this way, what kind of advice would you give them if maybe that ego functioning isn't really built or working? What would you recommend for them to improve their mental health or just get back to a sense of normal?
For me, some of the most like rewarding experiences I've ever had in life were kind of someone else holding me accountable, and pushing me to kind of get out of that comfort zone. I would say if someone out there is having like social anxiety or has kind of fears of putting themselves out there, or kind of if that just doesn't come naturally. Way back when I had it was like a message board online that I was a part of, and basically it was for people who were just like really socially anxious, and this was like pretty primitive internet. But basically I told them, like, I'm gonna go to this mall by my house, and I'm gonna try to talk to 5 people. And they're like, all right, go for it, man.
Wow.
And I showed up to the mall that day, and instead of talking to 5 people, I like hid in the bathroom for like 20 minutes.
This is a great story.
and then left. And had it not been for those people that I told I was doing it, and they were like, we can't wait to hear how it goes, I probably would have just like given up and never shown my face there ever again. But I knew that those guys were like gonna want to know what happened. So sure enough, I typed it up in all the, embarrassing details. And
Right.
and like the 4 or 5 dudes who were following it were like laughing. They're like, "Yeah, we knew it was gonna be like that. That's how it is for everybody." And I was like, "No way." And they're like, "Okay, like set your bar a little lower.
Uh-huh.
Go
Uh-huh.
just kind of ask for baby steps and work your way up." So it was like, if you can't do that, start with something easier, like maybe just like order a coffee or something and see how that
Yeah,
feels.
yeah, yeah.
And then kind of they described it as like momentum, like work your way up to more
Mhm.
difficult and scary things. And that was probably the most useful thing that I ever learned as far as like socializing, was that you can just kind of, and I think we talked about a little bit like exposure therapy, but um as I would do it more often, and as I had people to kind of help me and encourage me and provide a perspective that wasn't like, dude, you're not a loser, you're not a failure
And,
just because you couldn't
and
do
these were people
something.
like in an internet community, or they're like real
Yeah,
friends?
it was an internet community of
Okay, okay.
basically like self-improvement, like people just trying to
Interesting, interesting. So it was
uh
almost like a way to satisfy the need for there being somebody without really them having to be there, which is interesting.
yeah. But I mean, it made all the difference in the world. Like I couldn't make myself do that. Like I really
Mm.
couldn't. I tried, I went, and had I had someone there kind of hyping me up, maybe it would have been different. But I think that's one of those things where you can't, in the case of social anxiety, like it's the thinking that's the problem. You're
Mm,
creating all these problems and scenarios that aren't there. They're just in your head. And of
mhm.
course, the situation, the minefield that you've imagined is impossible to traverse. And that's why you're
Right.
struggling. But it's like, it's never that bad. And sometimes all it takes is another person to kind of just push you along and say, like,
Yeah. Look,
it's going to be okay.
you can test reality and not,
Yeah,
yeah, freak
exactly.
out. Yeah, you can do it. Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the times the fear point seems to be a huge affect. We speak in terms of affect and analytic thinking. The fear of somehow being swallowed up by the other, or maybe even ceasing to exist. Like I'm going to be destroyed, literally. And it feels so somatically terrifying, right? To assume that, right? Um, but that's the beauty of, and I think you're elucidating it so wonderfully, of an actual relationship
Hmm.
that can really challenge that.
Yeah.
Uh, and then you kind of work through it. And it's cool that you were able to kind of like build that even through an internet support group.
Right, right. Because again, I was a very shy kid. Like I didn't have too many friends that I could just go to.
Right.
So that was a fun resource that made the world a difference. So, if people are in that situation, I would say reach out to someone, see
Mhm.
who's around, see who's close by. And if there's no one close by, I promise there's people out there that are, you're not the only one that feels that way. And a lot
Yeah,
of times, if you're brave enough to talk about it, other people, it gives other people permission to
exactly.
share their own experience, and it's never as bad as you imagine. It's always
Yeah.
much easier, and a lot of times much better.
Well, we only have about a minute left, but it reminds me so much of this sort of dream I have for having my own clinic one day where I can sort of focus less on pathology and more on like what it looks like when we're able to confront those things. What part of ourselves becomes more available? And
Hmm.
what kind of feelings do we have? A lot of times we actually experience more pleasure in life, and we want to keep feeling that way, right?
Hmm.
Instead of being sort of within ourselves. And it's exciting. So I want to thank you for being a part of the series,
Of
Charles,
course.
and we will
Thank
catch
you.
up soon. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And hopefully other people found this really relatable. So for those of you who are watching, please like, subscribe, and I will see you again, hopefully, for a new interview very soon. All right. Thanks, Charles.